Step closer, travelers, and let the library's hearth warm you. I've just pulled a rare volume from the high shelves. It smells of vanilla, old leather, and the damp breath of the Great Plains. It is called The Library in the Mist. The Wheelers and their magical dog, Barley, thought they knew every road. But the world hides secrets in the fog, stories that have forgotten their own endings. Can you hear the low hum of a midnight blue engine? Take a deep breath. We are about to board a bus where you don't just read the pages, you live them. Let's follow the Wander Wagon into the mist. The Library in the Mist, Chapter 1, The Beacon in the Gray. The Great Plains had disappeared. One moment, the Wander Wagon had been rolling across a golden sea of dry grass under a vast, open sky. The next, the world had been swallowed by a fog so thick it looked like curdled milk pressed against the windshield. It wasn't a cold mist, though. As Dad Arthur slowed the trailer to a crawl, he rolled down the window and sniffed the air. It didn't smell like rain or damp earth. It smelled like old, sun-warmed paper, dried vanilla beans, and the faint, metallic tang of a printing press. "I can't see the hood of the van, let alone the road," Dad Arthur muttered, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He adjusted his driving goggles, but even the enchanted lenses couldn't pierce this gray blanket. "The GPS is spinning in circles, Ellie. It's like the North Pole moved into the back seat." Mom Ellie leaned forward, her brow furrowed as she looked at her living map. The parchment was behaving strangely. Instead of drawing trees or roads, the ink was swirling into elegant, cursive loops that looked like the headers of an old ledger. "The land isn't gone, Arthur. It's just covered. This isn't weather. This is a transition." In the back, Max pulled his headphones off. The silence of the mist was heavier than his bass-boosted music. Is it just me, or did the air get quiet? Like library quiet? Lily was pressed against the side window, her small breath fogging up the glass. "There's a light," she whispered, pointing into the gray. "It's not a yellow light like a house. It's soft and white, like a candle behind a curtain." Barley, the golden retriever, stood up and gave a low, curious woof. His golden collar didn't pulse with the usual warning red of danger. Instead, it shimmered with a pale, welcoming golden. He trotted to the door and waited, his tail wagging in a slow, rhythmic arc. The family hadn't used a single wish yet today, which meant they still had all three remaining. The collar remained silent and mysterious, but the air around the dog pulsed with a soft, ready energy. Dad Arthur eased the Wander Wagon toward the glow. Slowly, a massive shape began to solidify in the mist. It wasn't a building. It was a vehicle, but one unlike anything they had ever seen. It was a towering, double-decker bus, painted a deep, midnight blue that seemed to absorb the fog around it. Iron-wrought lanterns hung from its sides, glowing with a steady, flameless light. The sides of the bus were overgrown with glowing wisteria vines, their purple blossoms pulsing like tiny hearts. Above the wide, wooden double doors on the side of the bus, a gold leaf sign swayed in the phantom breeze. The Biblio-Express, Stories for the Stranded. "A mobile library?" Max asked, climbing out of the van behind his parents. "Who are they lending books to out here? The coyotes?" "It's beautiful," Mom Ellie breathed, reaching out to touch the side of the bus. The metal felt warm, like it had a heartbeat. "This is ancient magic, the kind that travels between the lines of reality." The wooden doors creaked open on their own, inviting them into a warm, amber-lit interior. As the Wheelers stepped inside, the smell of the mist was replaced by the intoxicating aroma of a million journeys. Every inch of the bus, from floor to ceiling, was lined with mahogany shelves. Books of every size, color, and age were packed tightly together, Leather-bound tomes with iron clasps, scrolls tied with silk ribbons, and neon-colored paperbacks that seemed to hum with static electricity. The center of the bus opened up into a cozy reading lounge with plush velvet armchairs and a small brass stove that whistled softly. But there was no librarian, no driver, just the sound of pages turning somewhere in the back, moved by a stray draft. "Look at this one!" Lily cried, running to a pedestal in the center of the lounge. On the pedestal lay a massive open book. The pages were made of thick, cream-colored vellum. There was no title on the cover, but as the family gathered around it, they gasped. The illustrations on the page weren't static drawings. They were moving, shimmering ink washes. In the center of the right-hand page, they saw a tiny, perfectly detailed drawing of a yellow trailer, the Wander Wagon, parked next to a midnight blue bus. And standing right there, in the ink, were 4 little figures: a man in goggles, a woman with a map, a boy with headphones, and a little girl in a yellow raincoat. Next to them was a tiny golden dog. "That's us," Max whispered, reaching out a finger. "How can that be us? We just got here." "The book is writing us into the story," Mom Ellie realized, her hand trembling as she hovered it over the page. Lily, always the swiftest to act, didn't wait for a lecture on magical theory. She saw a beautiful drawing of a tropical lagoon on the opposite page, a place of turquoise water and palm trees that swayed in a painted wind. She placed her small palm flat against the ink. "I want to see the birds," she said. The ink didn't stay on the paper. It surged upward like a wave, wrapping around Lily's wrist like a silken ribbon. A sudden violent gust of wind filled the bus, smelling of salt and hibiscus. "Lily, wait!" Dad Arthur shouted, reaching for her, but as he touched her shoulder, the floor beneath their boots dissolved into warm, white sand. The mahogany shelves stretched upward, turning into towering palm trees, and the amber ceiling of the bus shattered into 1,000 pieces of bright, tropical sky. The mist was gone. The library was gone. The Wheelers were no longer readers. They were the characters. The Library in the Mist, Chapter 2. The Salt and the Silhouette. The transition was as sharp as a camera shutter. One breath was the scent of old paper. The next was a lungful of humid, tropical air that tasted of brine and overripe fruit. The mahogany floorboards of the Biblio-Express had vanished, replaced by the shifting, granular heat of a white sand beach. Dad Arthur stumbled, his heavy boots sinking into the shore. He reflexively pushed his goggles up, only to squint against a sun so bright it felt like a physical weight. "Lily! Max! Everyone stay!" He stopped, his voice catching. They weren't alone on the sand. A few yards away, a massive wooden hull lay groaning in the surf. It was a galleon. Its masts snapped like toothpicks, and its sails tangled in the branches of the jungle trees that crowded the beach. The air was filled with the rhythmic thump-thump of the tide and the screeching of bright red macaws circling above. "We're inside the page," Mom Ellie whispered. She looked down at her hands. Her skin looked different, sharper, as if her outlines had been drawn with a fine-tipped pen. She reached for her living map, but the parchment had transformed. It was now a thick, weathered sea chart with frayed edges, decorated with drawings of sea monsters and compass roses. "The library didn't just move us. It translated us into the genre." Max tugged at his clothes. His modern hoodie had become a rough-spun linen tunic, and his headphones were now a leather band wrapped around his forehead. "This is way too high-res for a dream," he muttered, kicking the sand. "I can feel the heat on my neck. If this is a book, where are the words?" "There!" Lily shouted, pointing toward the wreckage of the ship. Floating in the air above the shattered deck were shimmering, golden lines of text. They hung like neon signs, though they were written in a beautiful, flowing script. The crew was imprisoned, leaving only the map and the mystery of the golden key. "It's a prompt," Dad Arthur said, his engineering mind quickly grasping the mechanics. "The story is stuck. It's waiting for the characters to move the plot forward. If we don't play our parts, I don't think we can leave." Suddenly, the sand beneath them began to vibrate. From the dense jungle, a group of figures emerged, but they weren't people. They were animated shadows, silhouettes of pirates made of shifting ink and charcoal. They carried cutlasses that glinted with a dull, leaden light. They didn't speak. They moved with a synchronized, silent menace, circling the family. Barley let out a low growl. The golden retriever's fur seemed to shimmer with a metallic sheen in this world. He stood in front of Lily, his ears pulled back. His collar pulsed with a soft golden glow. He hadn't sneezed yet, but he was ready. "Arthur, the ship!" Mom Ellie cried, pointing to the sea chart. "The map says the sailors were trapped on the ship and the rudder is jammed in the reef. The story can't progress until the ship and crew is free." "I'm on it," Dad Arthur yelled. He reached into his tool belt, which had turned into a heavy leather pouch filled with iron wrenches and wooden mallets. He ran toward the surf, his boots splashing through the crystal-clear water. The ink pirates hissed, lunging forward. Max grabbed a piece of driftwood, swinging it to keep the shadows at bay. "Go, Dad! We'll hold the line!" Dad Arthur climbed the side of the broken galleon. The wood was slippery with seaweed, and the smell of rot was thick. He reached the stern and saw the problem. A massive, magical vine, part of the book's binding, had wrapped itself around the rudder, locking it in place. It wasn't made of plant matter. It was made of thick, hardened sentences. "The ship was anchored by the weight of lead," the vine read in glowing letters. Dad Arthur realized he couldn't just cut the vine with brute force. It was made of stubborn logic, not wood. He reached into his tool pouch and pulled out a heavy brass letter punch and a jeweler's hammer. The glowing sentence, "The ship was anchored by the weight of lead," pulsed with a heavy, leaden light. "Lead weight? We'll fix that," Dad Arthur grunted. He didn't strike the vine itself. Instead, he positioned his punch over the word lead. With a precise, rhythmic clink, 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 he began to knock the letters out of the sentence. The L fell and shattered like glass on the deck. The E dissolved into smoke. In their place, he hammered in new, lighter letters he found scattered like driftwood around the deck. He wasn't just fixing a ship. He was rewriting the obstacle. Under his sweat-streaked brow, the sentence began to shift and glow with a breezy, pale blue light. On the beach, the ink pirates were closing in. Barley realized the family was being overwhelmed. He looked at Lily, then at the shadows. He didn't wait for a command. He stepped forward, took a deep breath of the salty air, and tilted his golden head back. Up-choo! A wave of golden sparks erupted from his collar, but in this ink world, the magic manifested differently. The sparks turned into hundreds of tiny glowing erasers. They swarmed the ink pirates, rubbing out their weapons and blurring their edges until the shadows were nothing more than harmless smudges on the sand. At the same time, the father was working at the rudder. With a final, ringing strike of his hammer, the word lead was gone. In its place, the sentence now read, "The ship was anchored by the weight of feathers." The transformation was violent and magical. The thick, iron-hard vines instantly turned into millions of soft, white seagull feathers. The massive weight that had been crushing the rudder vanished. Without the heavy burden of the original sentence, the galleon felt light as a cork. A sudden, playful gust of wind caught the tattered sails, and the ship didn't just slide. It leaped off the reef, soaring over the waves for a brief, impossible second before settling into the deep water with a joyous, musical splash. The golden text in the air swirled like a disturbed hive of bees before settling into new, triumphant lines. Horizon is no longer a cage. As soon as the galleon settled into the water, the heavy chains binding the cargo doors crumbled into fine charcoal dust. From the belly of the ship, the crew swarmed onto the deck, sailors whose outlines shimmered like living sketches. The captain, an old mariner with a beard made of sea foam, approached Arthur and gave his hand a firm, grateful shake. "You have given us the wind and our freedom, strangers," he boomed. "Now that our ship feels the sea again, we shall see this story through to the end. The golden key still waits for us somewhere beyond the horizon, and we won't rest until it's found." With a wave of his hand, the crew broke into a rousing sea shanty that harmonized with the crashing waves. The Wheelers felt the reality of the book begin to push them gently back, knowing that in this world, life went on, and the galleon's sails were finally set toward their true destiny. A bright, blinding flash of white light erupted from the center of the ship's deck. The tropical heat vanished, the sound of the waves died away, and the smell of salt was replaced once more by the scent of old paper and vanilla. The family tumbled backward, landing hard on the plush velvet carpet of the Biblio-Express. They were back in the lounge. Lily was still holding a handful of white sand, but as she looked at it, the grains turned into tiny, cut-out letters before dissolving into nothing. "One chapter down," Mom Ellie panted, her fingers tracing the map as the ink settled back into its familiar, steady lines. She looked toward the windows, where the mist was no longer a flat gray. It had deepened into a soft, velvet indigo, swirling with tiny, glowing sparks that looked like distant stars. "Look," she whispered. "The library isn't closing. It's preparing the next stage. It's as if the bus itself is waiting for us to catch our breath before it reveals the next secret." Dad Arthur smiled, leaning back against the mahogany shelves. "Let it wait. Every great adventure needs a brief intermission, and I think we've earned ours." The end. The salt spray is still fresh on our faces, isn't it, travelers? The Wheelers have sailed out of the ink-stained tropics, and now the Biblio-Express is quiet, swaying gently like a cradle in the deep indigo mist. See those little sparks dancing outside the windows? Those are the stories of tomorrow, waiting for us to wake. But even the bravest explorers must rest. Let the scent of old paper and tropical vanilla wrap around you like a warm blanket. The lamps are dimmed, the bus is steady, and the next chapter is safely tucked away until the morning light. The end of this tale is just the beginning of our next journey. See you in the next adventure. I'll be right here when the sun rises, ready to turn the page with you. This was Elias. Sleep tight, and good night.